And I think what she did was she stuck to a corporate manager's line. So the system was to blame, people around me were to blame. Maybe with hindsight, I made some mistakes, but they weren't as serious as people say they are. And I'm afraid that's largely what we got from her.
Let's get back into the news because it's been a huge week in the inquiry into the Horizon Post Office IT case as the former Post Office Chief Executive Paula Vennells broke her almost decade-long omerta, her silence on the scandal. She was quizzed over the course of 3 days on how things unfolded during her time at the head of the organisation by both the counsel to the public inquiry and lawyers speaking on behalf of the sub-postmasters. It was the most anticipated appearance in the long-running inquiry into what's been described as the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history. Let's remind ourselves of a couple of those key moments. Now, there were gasps in the audience when one of Paula Vennells' emails from 2014 was read out.
I was more bored than outraged. The MP quoted, who, was full of bluster and inaccurate. Joe Hamilton lacked passion and admitted false accounting on TV. James Arbuthnot was nowhere to be seen. What I thought was helpful, that it was presented Horizon as the problem, which is exactly what Second Sight say they haven't found. And so easier for us to refute. There was nothing about intimidation, poor coaching, and the message about not knowing how to use the system, in my eyes, made the sub-postmasters look inadequate.
A solicitor for one of the sub-postmasters reading out that email from Paula Vennells, and on more than one occasion, the former CEO of the Post Office cried as she gave her side of the story.
I worked as hard as I possibly could to deliver the best post office for the UK. It would have been wonderful to have 30,000 post office branches. That would have been the best outcome ever, to have had more post offices in more communities. What I failed to do, and I have made this clear previously, is I did not recognise and it's been discussed across the inquiry, the imbalance of power between the institution and the individual, and I let these people down. I am very aware of that.
So that's Paula Vennells, the former chief executive of an organisation that at the time employed 40,000 people. Well, let's talk to Professor Richard Moorhead, a member of the government's Horizon Compensation Advisory Board. And Richard, you write a lot about this in inquiry and the evidence that we've been hearing. I know you're widely read. We need to talk about this. People were getting very, very, very excited about Paula Vennells' appearance. How did her appearance compare with what you had anticipated?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think she could have gone one of two ways. She could have made a full apology, or she could have stuck to a kind of corporate manager's line. And I think what she did was she stuck to a corporate manager's line. So the system was to blame, people around me were to blame. Maybe with hindsight, I made some mistakes, but they weren't as serious as people say they are. And I'm afraid that's largely what we got from her.
Which is extraordinary given how badly previous appearances by former post office executives who've done exactly the same thing have gone down. You would think that she or her advisors would say, don't be like them, it's been terrible, you need to come across as more human, and yet she wasn't able to do it.
Yeah, I think Ms. Vennells feels like she is human. She feels like she's a compassionate person. And I think one of the things she was confronting in the inquiry is people don't believe in her compassion, and it's not convincing. And we saw some very powerful examples of where her compassion looked like a line, looked like a hypocrisy. And the email that was read out there about the One Show program was a really good example of her kind of being unmasked, to use Tim Maloney Casey's line at the very end of the third day. So I think that was one of the reasons why she found it so upsetting, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I'm just looking at how she responded to Sam Stein-Casey, representing the victims, who actually accused her of talking absolute rubbish. And then he said, okay, give us names, please, of those who've let you down by withholding information as this scandal brewed. And she listed, and this was interesting, the senior IT executives, Mike Young, who apparently he's not being found, and Leslie Sewell, and then the general legal counsel, Susan Crichton, Chris Ojad, and Jane McLeod. What did you make of her being prepared to point the finger so directly at those named individuals?
That was totally unsurprising. She's been saying that for quite some time, basically that the lawyers were to blame. It was interesting to see her blame the technology and see chief operating officer people as well. She was always keen to try to blame Susan Crichton in particular. The interesting question is whether we really believe her that Susan Crichton didn't tell her enough of the full facts of the situation, or whether Susan Crichton did hold things back, and why would she do that? So that's one of the central questions, which really depends on whether we find Paula Vennells' story plausible or not, I think.
Yeah. What do you think was the key moment that Sir Win Williams and the team helping him with the draft of the final report will home in on, and that will make the final report, and that may inform the framing of the recommendations?
I think there were probably 3 or 4 times where she says, I wouldn't do something. I simply wouldn't do that. That's not the kind of thing that I do. And she's taken to very clear examples where she does exactly that in writing. And she's forced to say, well, I didn't really mean to write it like that. That's not what I meant. And I think it's those kinds of examples where the inquiry really has, if you like, found her out. The other is the sort of general implausibility of the absolute 2013 is the critical year. It was absolute chaos. Sam Steen went through a whole range of things that were going on that the CEO should have been all across. And both Tim Maloney and Ed Henry made the point about the float of Royal Mail Group in the background to give her a motive, if you like, for concealing things. And all of those things together, I think, will make the inquiry think, is it really plausible that she didn't know what she said she didn't know?
Yeah. You're a member of the government's Horizon Compensation Advisory Board, and often when I speak to sub-postmasters and mistresses on this programme, they're not happy with the compensation. It's too slow or it's too low. You've seen that Alan Bates, the Tribune of the People, has rejected 2 offers thus far. Where are we as far as this is concerned? Because from what I understand, the Post Office still has a say in the compensation, the amounts, and to whom it goes.
We are partway through the schemes. We'll have a new scheme set up for the convictions that were quashed yesterday. I think everybody is right to complain about it being too slow. The Post Office is still involved in particularly the HSS scheme and the first of the overturned conviction schemes, and that is, I think, deeply regrettable. The government had to make a choice between getting on with those schemes or taking it off the Post Office and causing further delay, and they decided to try and get on with it, but also force some more independence into the system through the appointment of Sir Gary Hickenbottom, for instance, who's a former Court of Appeal judge. So yes, it's been way too slow. It's been way too bureaucratic and way too adversarial, and that has largely been driven by the behaviour of the Post Office and the lawyers that they have had acting for them. It is deeply, deeply regrettable, and I can only really apologise to the sub-postmasters for that. But we've been trying to do all we can to try to speed things up and make things more independent.
Yeah, people have been attacking the former Post Office executives over the past few years, and particularly in the last few weeks, Richard. But what about the role of lawyers?
Oh, right. Gosh, well, I could talk literally for hours.
Please don't, but in a nutshell, because I think it really has to be focused on.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So lawyers were involved in setting up the contracts that caused all the problems in the first place. Lawyers were involved in the civil litigation against Lee Castleton, in the prosecutions of hundreds of people. We can see that work was both incompetent and professionally improper sometimes from the evidence that we've had before the inquiry. The handling of the review of convictions, which we've seen more recently in evidence before the inquiry, also had substantial flaws in it. The inquiry may well also regard that as professionally improper. We haven't even begun to hear about the Bates case really yet. That will come in the next few weeks. That was an absolute disgrace from front to back. The lawyer's behaviour is under serious scrutiny. There will be several lawyers who will face very, very pointed questions from Jason Beer and the other barristers. It is a moment of profound shame for the legal profession and the legal system. I can't tell you the number of lawyers who talk to me with astonishment and disgust at what their fellow legal professionals have done in some of these cases.